I'm checking out my recently rebuilt leveling valves, and I've got to say I am impressed. I mean, look at that. That's almost like a work of art. And I just received these recently from Martin Warminghausen, and he took the time to go completely through them. If you've watched some of the previous videos in this series, you know what's involved already and the amount of work it takes to properly rebuild one of these leveling valves that's going to make my air suspension W109 stay up and ride properly, okay? You know, like many of us who've owned these air suspension cars, we get really frustrated when you come out the garage and they're sitting down on the ground. So I'm done with that. We want this to work right. And you'd think, hey, I just got these valves back and I'm ready to just slap them on the car and get going. Well, don't be too hasty, okay? Martin warns you about this in his own manual that he's written. He's written a great manual on installing and setting the height adjustment for these valves on the W112 chassis, the W109, and the W100. So this has got some very good information in it, and the job is not done. If you just think you can get these valves back and just bolt them onto the car, you're kidding yourself, okay? There's a lot of prep work you need to do. And the first thing, the very first thing that I need to warn you about is cleanliness. And we're talking super cleanliness, not just kind of cleanly, okay? Because if you saw in the previous videos these little valves and how sensitive the seats are, can you imagine if you bolt these up and just get a little piece of dirt coming through one of the airlines and get on that seat? Now granted, over time it might work its way loose, but there's no guarantee. You could have a leaking valve within a few days, and you're right back where you were before you sent these off to have them rebuilt. So we're going to go through the process right now in preparing my 1971 300 SEL. It's kind of interesting to note this car is 43 years old. So when you look at a car this old, it's got all those metal lines running to the valves and into the airbags. And can you imagine some of those fittings, how old they are, and some of the dirt that's collected on them? Any of that could flake off and travel and get down in these valves. So I have a lot of work to do. I'm going to be very careful. Once again, I don't want to have to do this again. And if, just like Martin says, if this is done properly, the valves are rebuilt properly, they're installed properly with super cleanliness, they can last for a long time. Don't expect that your car has just, you know, you're going to have to do this again and again and again. I know people who've had their valves rebuilt by other companies in the past, and then they've complained they've put them on and they didn't work very long. Well, I know now from my own experience it's probably particulate contamination back into those seats of those really sensitive little bullet valves in these units right here. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go through a process. Excuse me, I'm not going to tell you everything because it's covered in Martin's manual. You can go to www.600airsuspension.com. I'll also leave a link in the bottom of the description of this video. And read about his company and what he's doing, because he is now offering this service to people who own these cars. But he's got some good information on his website as well. The first thing I'm going to do is start blowing air through the lines. That's the first thing I'll do. And let me show you how I'm going to go about doing that. This is going to be a multi-phase process, this whole internal cleaning of the system. I mean, there's probably a number of ways you can do this, and this is kind of the way I'm going to approach it. But we're going to talk about, you know, doing it more than once, repeat, to make sure we get all the air out. I'm going to start with the main lines here, okay? The main lines and the fittings. And what I've done is I've removed the main valve that bolts right here on the inner fender panel. And this, by the way, I had Martin rebuild this about a year ago, and then we realized, you know, we're going to have to do the leveling valves as well. So I know the main valve is in good condition. But we've got a number of things that we've got a tank up here, a reservoir tank. We've got the the filter and alcohol reservoir here, any of these things, even the line coming from the compressor, could have dirt in them, or even the smallest particles of dust, or little pieces of metal that have flaked off. But I'm not going to go through the whole sequence in this. It'll make this video too long, but I'm just going to show you some highlights, and then you can kind of develop your own system, make sure you get it thoroughly clean. But I'm going to start, and now that I have the valves are out of the car, the main valves out, I'm just going to take and blow through all these lines. I'll just sit here and blow through them with compressed air. Each line maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And I've got all these lines disconnected. And as I'm looking at these and looking at these threads, I can see there's potential for a little dirt on the back side of that flare fitting, and the threads and the top of the nut here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to completely clean. We're going to put the car up in the air next, and we're going to go under there, and we're going to clean every single fitting in the end of every single line here where the flare is. And we're going to make sure we're going to use cleaner and solvent and brake cleaner and compressed air. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the car back down. I'll come back and I'll clean these fittings. And then I'm going to blow air through again. And then I'm going to rinse it with alcohol. That's right. I'll show you what I'll use to inject alcohol down in the lines, and then using compressed air. So that's just the lines. And we got to look at the airbags and some of these other things. But the process is going to begin now, and I'll show you briefly, once we get the car up in the air, I'll kind of show you what we're doing to clean all those fittings, because it's probably those dirty, rusty, fittings under the car that could be a bigger problem than the ones here in the engine compartment. We use a wire brush to thoroughly clean the threads and get around the end of that pipe too. That's real important. We're going to take each one of these threaded fittings on all the lines and clean those, and then I'm going to use a spray bottle with alcohol to rinse them down thoroughly. I'm not going to worry about getting any alcohol or dirt back down the lines, because once again we're going to go up top when we do this and flush it back, and then compressed air. Nothing beats good, strong compressed air. We have everything cleaned underneath, all those lines and fittings, rinsed down, blowed off with compressed air, rinsed down again, brushed again, blowed off again. And we've lowered the car back down, and then I'm going to do the final flush. And the final flush of the lines requires that I pump quite a bit of alcohol into the lines and then hit it with compressed air again. Now, here we go. Here's one of my favorite tools. If you've watched some of my other videos, you've seen this in numerous applications. But this little pumper, this little pump sprayer works amazing. Number one, it has a swivel head, which will allow you to get it, pointed directly into the entrance of one of those lines. The other thing is you can adjust the tip here to get a fine jet of spray rather than a fan of spray. So I've pumped up some pressure, and I'll get it lined up here, and we'll get it right on the end of this first line. And then I'm going to just put quite a bit of alcohol in there. You can hear it running down the pipe. And then I'll immediately get the compressed air. And, all right, this is just blowing out the other end of that hard line right onto the shop floor. It's really important you use alcohol for this. You could use some other chemical. You don't want to use brake cleaner, carb cleaner, anything like that, because that could get into the valves. That chemical could get into the valves and might be harmful to the the new seal. So alcohol is your best cleaner. It's much better on your lungs, and it's just safer to work with. So good old denatured rubbing alcohol. I recommend you go to the hardware store and buy a whole gallon, because by the time you're done with this operation, you will probably use a gallon of alcohol. So I'll go ahead and do all of these. You don't need to see them all on this segment of the video. We'll get all 4 of these lines done. Then I'm going to pull this line off and the check valve going into the tank. We're going to clean that. Then I'm going to have to deal with this filter. There's a filter right here. This is the intake air filter, and this is the canister that holds the alcohol for the system. Martin's already worked on this, but it's been a while, so I'm going to take it off and just do a final cleaning and clean all these hoses, both coming into it and exiting it. Then we'll put the car back up in the air and install the valves and go through the entire adjustment procedure. And I'm not going to show that in this video. That's thoroughly covered in Martin's manual. But when we get done, I'm going to come back and at least show you whether or not we were successful, and you'll get a chance to see if this car is indeed sitting level. I'm really having fun now. You know, the most difficult part of this whole operation when you're rebuilding these leveling valves is getting them back on the car. It's not just getting them back on the car and getting them back safely on the car and preventing any dirt from getting in them becomes a real challenge, particularly on the front one and the left one in particular, because it's so close up against the steering box. You have a very difficult time to work in there. We've made a couple of special tools. I would say before you go out to do this, pick up a couple of cheap 12 millimeter combination wrenches, ones that you can cut short, bend, whatever, to get to those fittings, because they are difficult to get on and you do have to be very patient. Martin says in his manual that patience is a virtue when it comes to working on this air suspension system, and so it is when you go to replace these leveling valves. Now, I'm not even going to try to film putting those front ones on. It's so hard to work up in there that, we're just going to briefly film this rear one so I can show you a couple of tricks that I use when installing these. Outside of dirt entering the valve, the next most important thing is do not cross-thread the fittings. If you damage the threads on one of these hardline fittings, you have a big problem, a real big problem. So you have to be very careful. So preparation, once you've cleaned everything, and you're sure you flush the lines, and we have thoroughly cleaned the fittings on all 4 of these hard lines here, and we've cleaned the area around it so no dirt could drop in. And note that until the last minute, I will leave these plugs in the leveling valve until I'm ready to start the installation process. But what we do in preparation is you want to make sure that the pipes are clean and that the fittings themselves turn very easily on the pipe. They spin very easily because you're going to have to start these by hand. You do not start these with a wrench. And what I do is I lift the valve up in there and I get them all started before I ever bolt it down. But I do want to warn you on the left front one that you want to put the bolts in the holes, even though you're not going to start the bolts until you get all the lines started and threaded in by hand a ways. If you don't put one of the bolts in first and set it up in there, you're going to have a very hard time getting it in, because once again the steering box is sitting very close to it. So just a little warning there. Now on the rear one, I've got a lot of room to work, so I don't have to worry about putting the bolts in these holes until I get all 4 of those lines started by hand. And I'm going to repeat by hand. That's why you want to make sure they spin. And let me show you now. I've got this all ready, and I'm just going to set this up in there, and we're going to get the fittings started so you can see how this is done. Here you can see a close-up of the lines and fittings. Notice how I've cleaned them thoroughly, including the threads, and then I've put just a very light film of oil on the pipe and a very light film. We're talking, you don't want to get any oil in the valve, so just a little bit on the threads. And you can see now I've checked each one of these, and they spin freely by hand. If you can't spin them freely by hand, don't even try to start the valve. You need to fix that first. Now I'm going to take the valve and very carefully, you're going to lift it up in here, and you're going to make sure that you don't bang it into any dirt. And I'm going to lay it up in here so that that forward one starts in the hole like that, and then I'll put each of the pipes in the hole, in their respective holes. Now this one I'm just going to go ahead, because it's already lined up, I'm going to just start with one thread, and then I'll come in here and line this one up. Oh, it didn't start. Sometimes you think, and look at how, see how I'm wiggling it? And if it doesn't go in easily, then stop. Okay, that one started. Now I'm going to come up to the front one. Make sure I get this front one started. Okay, that one started. Now look at this one. This one's going to be a little challenge because it's a little bent. Okay, that doesn't look good. See the angle that that's going into the... All right, so I'm going to pull this back out. It's not doing what it should. It looks like the pipes are slightly bent. And I'm going to straighten these pipes out a little bit. They all need to be, you can see this one's straight up and down, this one's straight, but this one's bent in a little bit. So I'm going to bend the pipes a little bit and retry, and we'll come back and retry this. For this rear valve, I like to start the forward upper one first. That's the hardest one to get going. So what I did is I lifted this up in here, and then I just got it so it would go in by hand. And then the next one was to start this one. And what you have to do is you may have to, twist this. See that? If I try to turn it by hand right now, it won't turn. But if I put a little twist to it, see it go in? And that's the way it should go in. It should just go in and out. And you may have to wiggle this and twist because the alignment has to be perfect on these threads to get it started. And once again, you make sure it's at least halfway in by hand before you ever put a wrench to it. Now you can see on these last two how I've got them so they spin easily. I've got a little bit of oil on the tube and just a light amount of oil on the threads. And now we'll begin to get this third one in. And you kind of sight down, check alignment. Okay, see, you don't want to start it. If you can see it's cocked right there, you don't even want to try until you get it straight. And then, once again, wiggle and work it in. Okay, see, this one's going in again. We're going to get it in at least halfway. Okay, that one started. And now we'll do the final one. Carefully lift that up into the hole. And then I'll sight and see how straight it is. This one looks pretty straight, so this one might start without too much problem. No, see that? It's not starting. So it looks like I'm going to have to bend it a little forward like this. And you'll feel it when it goes. See that? All right, now I'm kind of twisting the pipe a little bit, and I've got it in enough. I'll reach up here and twist the pipe a little bit more. All right, so there's a little bit of strain on the pipe. As much as you're careful when you remove these, they could be under stress from a previous installation. So you have to be very, very careful when you start these. And once they're halfway in, then you can take a wrench to it and just start snugging these down. See that? And if they're not going in easily, that means that you didn't get it started right. And if it doesn't go easy, you stop, literally stop, take everything out. Because if you cross thread, you can replace this piece here, but if you cross thread and damage one of the threads on the pipe fitting, then you're going to have a real problem. So we'll go ahead and snug these down. We won't tighten them yet until we put the bolts in. So now with this loose, I'll put the bolts in, tighten the bolts down, and then I'm going to come back and tighten each one of these fittings. They don't need to be very tight, and Martin points this out in his manual. They only take a very small amount of torque because once again, you're counting on the rubber seal in here to do the real sealing. So don't over tighten these fittings or you can damage the seat and they will leak. So we'll get this one tightened up, the two front ones tightened up. Then we'll come back and talk a little bit about how we're going to go about the height adjustment, because that is probably right behind getting the valves on is also the second most difficult job and the most time consuming to get the car level and these valves adjusted properly. Well, here it sits, and it's been sitting like this for over 2 weeks. You can imagine how happy I am. Man, this is great. The car rides nice, it handles nice, and best of everything is it doesn't go down when you let it sit for, 4 or 5 days. So I'm impressed. I'm impressed with the good job that Martin did on those valves, and I'm hoping that I don't have any problem with this for the next few years, that basically the air suspension is fixed. I've got a little bit more fine tuning to do on it. I know in the previous scene I talked about going through some of the steps on the whole leveling process, but after reading Martin's manual, I said, I can't outdo what he's already written. So if you want, and it's quite complex, by the way, and it'd probably be a very long video, and I don't think I need to do that when Martin's already written it out in this very, very well written multi-page manual on how to go through the step-by-step process of getting the car leveled properly after you install the rebuilt valve. So I'm going to leave it at that. We did, by the way, we did go in, once the valves were all installed, we did go in, and this is something you should do, is we just double checked for leaks. We started at the main valve, and sprayed that down with soapy water, and 0 leaks. And then we went underneath to each one of the leveling valves, and once again, no leaks. No leaks anywhere in the system. And we went through the leveling process, started up. The compressor appears to be working good. Martin, by the way, rebuilt my little air filter on the system, and he'll point that out in his manual as well, that a lot of times you'll look at this filter on the system, this little round filter, and you'll think it's fine, but it's not. It's probably deteriorated and coming apart inside. That's another point of contamination. So if you need more information, if you need help, any help at all, with your air suspension 600 or W109, I highly recommend that you go to Martin's website and check out the information he has on both this manual here and on the process he goes through to rebuild these valves for you, if that's something you should choose. I will leave links. I will leave links in the show more description below in this video. So if you want to go check out Martin's website or contact him for his rebuilding services, you're welcome to that. Just follow those links and it'll take you right to them. I'm going to go cruising now. I am going to go cruising in my 109, which I haven't been able to do for years.